It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. And like you said, my name is Dr Hawrard. I'm a faculty member at the University of Northern Colorado in the School of Sport and Exercise Science, and I'm the director of the Rocky Mountain Cancer Rehabilitation Institute. I was invited to come, but I told them I want to have a couple of minutes just to talk about who we are and what we do. So I get that opportunity. I'd just like to tell you a little bit about our institute. Our institute was established on the campus of UNC back in 1996, and a dear friend of mine, Dr. Carol Schneider, was the one who founded the institute. She was the first patient. And since that time, we have grown significantly. We now have our own building on campus through grant funding, a 10,000 square foot facility. And what we do is we offer exercise-based rehabilitation programs. So specifically talking about ours, it's prescribed exercise, it's individualized, everything is supervised one-on-one. So what we have is an academic program in the School of Sport and Exercise Science. We train undergraduate students to work with cancer patients. Cancer patients come to the program where we teach our students. But in addition to that, we also have workshops and training programs where we open that up and anybody can come and we teach them how to work with cancer patients in an exercise setting, how to start your own program. And we have had people, and I kid you not, they come from all over the world to Greeley, Colorado, where we can teach them how to do that. We're to the point now where we're going out and doing our workshops and trainings. We just did one in Hawaii. So that was totally a great idea for us to start taking them on the road. So we got to go to Hawaii and do that. So that's our educational component. Our clinical component is just providing these services. So we offer the services to any cancer patient. It doesn't matter where on the continuum they are. There are some, obviously, that we like to see. We like to see the ones going through treatment, and then right after treatment. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then the research component. And I would like to share with you some of our research. I really believe that this happens with our patient population. When we tell them our research findings, it's powerful and it means something. Because some of them are involved in our clinical studies, and then we also do animal research as well. So all this information that we disseminate to them helps them understand, okay, what I'm doing. Here's the beneficial effect of that. Here's why I feel better. Here's what's going on, some mechanisms that are involved. So I'd like to share some of that with you today. So what about exercise in cancer wellness? This kind of this big picture. So the good news is this, and you guys know this, cancer survival rates are increasing. So as a result of that, we've got an increase in the number of people that are living with cancer. That population is growing. The bad news is that, depending on what study you look at, they report up to 95% of cancer survivors have severe treatment-related side effects. So this demonstrates the need that we have, and that need is to reduce both cancer and cancer treatment-related side effects and to improve the quality of life. That's really the bottom line for us. Are we improving the quality of life for the people that we serve? So that brings us to cancer rehabilitation. And I know that cancer rehabilitation is a big area. If you talk to a lot of healthcare providers, they're going to really say it's a lot of different things, and it is. But we just focus on the exercise component. And I'm going to say this, I know there's probably some people that would agree with me and some people that wouldn't, but in my opinion, I believe that exercise is the most underutilized tool in the rehabilitation of cancer survivors. We don't use it enough, and we need to start making it a standard of care. So, what are the benefits of exercise in general? You're probably very familiar with this, and we just heard this. Just in the general population, the more fit you are, the lower your risk is of dying, regardless. It doesn't matter. So the higher the fitness level, the less risk you have of dying. And this same principle applies to cancer populations as well. This particular figure is looking at it in terms of exercise capacity. So looking at somebody's ability to consume oxygen. We look at oxygen consumption as a measure of somebody's fitness level. The more oxygen you can consume during exercise, the better your fitness level. So you can see over here, the most fit individuals have a much less risk of dying. And again, this applies to the cancer population as well. So, in the context of cancer, we've already talked about these as well. Those individuals who are physically active have a lower risk of developing cancer. There's a lot of studies out there looking at recurrence. At least 20 different large-scale studies have suggested that physically active individuals have a lower risk of recurrence. And then another benefit would be that we can counteract the negative side effects. So all of these together really make a case for exercise. The one thing I would like to focus, I would say most of my time on, will be treatment-related toxicities. When we look at this in a systems view, where we look at what effects are these treatments having on the heart, on the muscles, on the lungs, on the nerves of the brain, the blood, bone marrow, or systemically, some systemic changes that might occur. And then what is exercise doing in each of these cases to provide a beneficial effect? So for example, I'm not going to read through all these for each one of these, but it's just going to set the stage for some of the stuff that we've done. So looking at cardiotoxicity, so the heart, there's a lot of chemotherapeutic drugs that are known to damage the heart. And in some cases, if you give patients enough of a particular type of drug, it will induce heart failure. And that's the limiting factor for that particular treatment, and it may be the most effective treatment they have. So what does exercise do? Comparing these two. So with cardiotoxicity, it impairs how the ventricle, the chambers of the heart, one of the main chambers, it impairs how it contracts. It also impairs how it relaxes. It just becomes dysfunctional. How much blood it can pump with each beat or over time. It just reduces the amount of blood, and as a result of that, we compromise how much oxygen we can deliver. Exercise, if you look at it, really matches almost all these negative side effects. It's going to improve contractile function, how the heart contracts, and how it relaxes, which is a huge factor in terms of cardiac function, how the heart relaxes. So a lot of these drugs will impair the relaxation, and exercise improves that. It increases how much blood the heart can pump, and it does a lot of other things. And I wanted to show you, I want to explain to you some of these studies that we've done, because I think that the findings are pretty interesting, and it may stimulate some ideas in you or me or anyone else that might be listening. So for these particular studies, these are studies that were done in rats. So we take rats and we exercise train them. We have treadmills, so we have rat treadmills, they can run on treadmills. We have commercial grade running wheels, so they can run on wheels. And we also weight train. They also do weight training. We have a way to weight train the animals. We have to be very creative with that. We also have to be creative with all the other exercise modalities, because they're just like we are. They don't want to exercise. There's a lot of them that don't want to exercise. I'll give you an example. We have rats that if you put them on a treadmill and they have their own little lane and you start that thing running, a lot of them figure out if they can put their feet against the walls and the belt will go underneath them and they won't have to exercise. So we've had to come up with some pretty interesting strategies to keep them running. Now if you look at voluntary exercise, we just put a wheel in there. If you had a rat, a mouse, or a guinea pig growing up, you probably know where I'm going with this. They will run by themselves, and they'll run in the dark. So at night, I don't know if you had one when you were a kid, and you had a wheel in the cage, you just hear that thing running, and that's what our animals do. We just let them run. And for the resistance training, we have some creative ways of doing that as well. So here's some data that we have. There's a particular drug that we're looking at in this particular study. It's called doxorubicin. It's an anthracycline, and some of you, if you're a cancer survivor, you may know what I'm talking about, or if you have a family member, you may know which drug I'm talking about. A high incidence of cardiac dysfunction and possibly heart failure. So in these studies, what we did is we exercise animals and we start their exercise training at the time they start their treatment. So just clinically, somebody comes in, they've never been involved in exercise, they start chemotherapy, and then they start exercising. That's exactly what we're doing in our animal models. And basically what we have, I'll just point these out to you. Here's our controls. These are the animals that don't do anything. They don't get any drug. They don't exercise. Here's what this variable is. And then right here is what happens when the sedentary animals undergo chemotherapy. So these three up here, these are just variables to measure how the heart is performing. So you can see, here's what happens when they take this particular drug. All these variables go down. It impairs how the heart is working. And then if you look at the exercised animals, they practically normalize. They come back to where those values are, and animals don't exercise or get any drug at all. So I'm trying to get through this quickly, but we started to look at mechanisms as to why is that going on? What's going on that could protect the heart? This particular drug induces what we call oxidative stress. And you may have heard of that term, very common in cancer, with development of cancer and cancer treatments. It's just the production of molecules that will then damage other molecules in the cell. So they can damage proteins, they can damage fats that make up the membrane, and cause a lot of problems that way. And exercise is known to increase the enzymes that get rid of those reactive oxygen species is what they are. So we thought, well, exercise must be increasing those enzymes, so it's getting rid of all the bad stuff that's being produced by the chemotherapeutic drug. And what we saw, that's not what's going on. The exercise that we were doing did not upregulate those enzymes at all. They didn't increase. So we started to ask the question, what could be going on? There's actually less oxidative stress in there, but those enzymes that are responsible for that they're not increasing. So we asked the question, is there as much of the drug in the heart after they exercise? And we tried a lot of different things, and when we did this was kind of an aha moment for us. And that is that animals that exercise, there's less of the toxic drug that is into the heart. So we're protecting the heart. So the next question is, how's that happening? What's going on? So we tried to answer that a lot of different ways, and we came to this. There are certain proteins that can be expressed or that can show up on the membrane of cells. They're called multi-drug resistance proteins. And what they do is they pump bad stuff out of the cell. And every cell has these proteins, it's just a matter of how much they have. And exercise causes those to go up. So if we increase in the cell membrane these proteins that can get bad stuff out of the cell, and what we see is that in those animals that exercise, they have more of those proteins, and that in turn is causing less of that drug to accumulate in the heart to cause the damage. So this is one direction that we've gone in. Another thing I just want to mention too is that I get this question when I talk all the time about, okay, well that was with an animal that had chemotherapy, but we all have cancer and we have tumors and those kinds of things. How does that affect the heart? What we show in our studies is that having tumors also causes dysfunction in the heart. And I'm not going to show you all the numbers, but these are the data to show that same thing. Having cancer also causes dysfunction in the heart, and exercise can restore that function. We did a lot of things to look at the mechanisms as well, but I think that's important to know that it's not just with treatment, but it's also with cancer as well. So other toxicities, what about muscle? This is one of the toxicities that I think is kind of overlooked. We're very concerned about the heart, we're very concerned about the lungs, the liver, kidneys, and those organs, but skeletal muscle, when we talk about performance and functional capacity, this is important as well. So what we see is a decrease in force production. We see an increase in fatigue in these muscles. And exercise can address that. If you look at, again, these are animal studies. I'm going to get to some clinical stuff here in just a second too, to show you what happens with people. But the same thing here. The chemotherapeutic drug can directly cause the muscle to become fatigued and to reduce the amount of force that it can produce. And this is to give you some example of some of the studies that we do. So we take the muscles out and we put them in these little baths, and then we stimulate them electrically, and then we measure force production. And if you look at this is a fatigue experiment. So where we cause the muscle to contract and relax, contract and relax, and contract and relax over and over and over and over and over again for 100 seconds. And you can see the fatigue that develops in these muscles. This right here is what happens to a muscle that's been treated with a chemotherapy drug. So you can see this line right here. This white line represents a normal animal. No drug, no exercise, no anything. These other two lines represent a resistance-trained animals and those that went through aerobic exercise training with treadmill running. And what you see is, here's one of the variables we look at, is how long does it take before it reaches a certain threshold of fatigue? And you can pick anyone you want, but we usually choose about 75%. How long does it take before the muscle only generates 75% of its normal maximal tension? And you can see with those animals that get the chemotherapy drug, it happens within 30 seconds. But these other ones over here, the controls right here, and these are the exercised animals, it takes longer for that muscle to develop fatigue. So we can see again the benefits of exercise. There are pulmonary toxicities, and we've looked into that as well. All these changes that can occur negatively with treatments, and then the improvements that you see with exercise. And then neurotoxicity. This is very interesting when we become interested in this as well. I'm going to talk about these two, cognitive dysfunction and neuropathies, so peripheral neuropathies. And then all the benefits of exercise, and two of those are going to be that they improve cognitive function. I'll show you some data on this here too. And then I wish I had time to show you some data on this one. We just finished a study looking at peripheral neuropathies, and our exercise training regimen reduces peripheral neuropathy, so in the extremities. But I did want to show you this one. This is an interesting study we did. We have something called a brain bike. And if you're familiar with cognitive dysfunction that occurs with chemotherapy treatment, you guys know this as like chemo brain, that kind of stuff. You're familiar with that? So what we were looking at is an exercise training regimen to try to offset that. And what we see is this. So with our brain bike, we have people exercise, so they ride the bike, and then they have this computer screen here. And you can see there's the computer screen. And they do cognitive training while they're doing exercise. The reason why we did this is because there are studies that show that exercise can improve cognitive function. So that was kind of, other people have done that. And we also have seen studies where cognitive exercise improves cognitive function. So somebody that's having cognitive deficits, things like reaction times or executive decision making or spatial problem solving, those kinds of those cognitive disorders. There's studies that show that if you do training for that, you can attenuate or reduce the chemo brain that you have. So we had this great idea and we said, well, let's get this brain bike and we'll put them both together. So we'll exercise people and we'll have them do that at the same time. We're going to see this synergistic effect where the improvements are going to be unbelievable. So we did the study, we just finished it a couple of months ago, and we were pretty surprised, and I'm going to show you that with you. So here's what we were looking at. And I just picked these. We had this really extensive cognitive test that we put them through. So logical memory, trail making, WAIS, it's just, these are all cognitive tests. And you can just see pre to post values. And here you can see the controls. So these are the people that didn't do anything. So they didn't do any cognitive exercise, they didn't do any physical activity. Exercise training. And then we have the group here, the cognitive group. Those are the ones that did the cognitive training on a computer. And then we have those that did exercise, and this is the group that did both. And if you look at this, what you see is that in every one of those cases where we measure cognitive function, those individuals that exercised and did the cognitive training at the same time were the worst of any group. And the best group that we had was the group that did aerobic training alone. So they just did the training by itself. Now doing this makes us ask a lot more questions. One of the questions is the difficulty of our training program. And we got this qualitatively from the people in the study. They said, hey, listen, that was very stressful. You know, I'm trying to ride my bike, and these questions, you know, they're asking me, it's freaking me out. I can't even think about this, and I'm trying to maintain the pedaling rate. And the other thing that was interesting too is if you look at, this is our pre to post increase in oxygen consumption. So this tells us that our exercise trained. Did they become exercise trained? And you can see what it did to them. What it did is the cognitive exercises kept them from keeping their pedaling rate and getting the benefits of the physical activity, of the exercise. So this is an interesting study because it's hopefully going to lead to some more things that we do as well. Blood toxicities, again, I'm not going to talk much about that, but some other side effects, oxidative stress, inflammation, autophagy, these are all things that you can look at systemically and even locally in some different organs and tissues as well. And then the psychological aspects of the toxicity, as we just mentioned. And here's some data from our exercise training program. And there's a lot of numbers up there. So what I did is I just highlighted the ones that we looked at that were statistically significant. So we run statistics on these and we see, you know, what variables do we see changes in. So with a 12-week exercise training program, no cognitive functions, it's just a basic training program in our facility, what types of changes do we see? And if you look at this, these are all muscular strength, so composite arm strengths. This is like taking all these and coming up with a score and then comparing those here, leg strength, hand grip strength is another one, and then oxygen consumption. And here, these are our exercise groups here. And pre to post, we have significant increases in almost every one of these variables. And in those that didn't engage in our exercise training program, there's no difference. So all these variables, we see very significant increases in all these. Here's some fatigue, perceived fatigue, and I'm going to talk about that hopefully. I have time here in a few minutes to talk about this as well. So here's our fatigue parameters, total fatigue. You can see pre to post, we see significant changes, and we don't with those individuals that do not engage in the program. And this is another one too, looking at oxidative stress. Our program reduces oxidative stress, which is measured, again, a systemic measure of oxidative stress. There's less proteins that are damaged in the blood, there's less DNA that's damaged in the blood, and we increase the amount of these enzymes that are responsible for protecting the body. So anyway, just a summary of one of our programs. So what about our programs? What are some recommendations that we have if you're engaging in an exercise training program? What I would say, and those of you that were at the breakout session, this is the part where I talk about what we've already talked about, so I apologize for that. But some of you haven't heard it yet, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this. What we recommend, what we see the greatest changes with, would be a structured one-on-one exercise program. So when we have patients that come in and they get a trainer, we do a physical assessment on them, we run them through our program for 3 months or 6 months. We see the greatest gains in all these variables that we talked about. The next best thing would be a group setting where they exercise in groups, and I should say this too, we actually offer those as well. So we do offer those for our patients, but we try to get everybody into our one-on-one structured program. There's also home-based programs where people come in, they kind of get trained on how to do an intervention, and they go home on their own. Those are even less effective, and then those self-directed type interventions where people are just kind of left out on their own. Those are options as well. But when you think about these types of programs, there's 2 things I would like for you to consider, and that would be the difference between these 2, and that is the difference between physical activity and exercise training. There's a movement to incorporate more exercise into the rehabilitation of cancer survivors, but unfortunately, in my opinion, there's a lot that's going in the wrong direction, and that wrong direction is this, because a lot of these programs are emphasizing physical activity. So for example, studies where they put a pedometer on somebody and say, okay, try to increase the number of steps you take per day. So a typical cancer patient undergoing treatment might walk 3,000 steps a day, maybe 4, and the goal is to get them up to 5,000 steps a day. Those types of increases they do not result in measurable physiological changes. Now, those types of programs can increase quality of life. They can decrease fatigue to some degree, perceived fatigue, and depression, but they don't result in measurable physiological changes. And exercise training does. So exercise training is planned, it's structured, it's repetitive, and it's intended to increase these measures. And these measures are associated with a lot of important outcomes for cancer patients. So I think that's important to differentiate between a lot of the programs where it's just physical activity. Here's the recommendations. I'm going to show you the recommendations by 2 organizing bodies that are involved with this: the American College of Sports Medicine and the American Cancer Society. Here's the American College of Sports Medicine. Here are their recommendations. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things here. What they're recommending is that cancer survivors adhere to physical activity guidelines for Americans. So general guidelines for the general population. And their recommendation is 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity aerobic exercise. Here's what I got a problem with, and we talked about this earlier today, and that is that we're not dealing with the normal population. This is not the population we're dealing with, and they're trying to take these guidelines and put them on a population where it doesn't apply. And their guidelines are so vague, 150 minutes exercise intensity, unless you've got somebody that knows what they're doing, there's so much that's ambiguous, that's left up to the person to interpret. And that's where we believe that these structured exercise programs are beneficial, because we have exercise intensities depending on where you're at in your treatment cycle, depending on the type of cancer you have, what type of treatment you're going through. Another thing that they do mention that I think is important is just that it's tailored to the individual. We do believe that that's very important. And then this one here, I just want to go back to avoiding activity. I'm not saying that it's bad to put a pedometer on and try to increase the number of steps you take per day, because I think it is beneficial. It speaks to our obesity issue, that we can lower body fat mass. That's one way that we can do that. But it should not be at the expense of a structured, organized exercise intervention. The American Cancer Society, same thing. Their recommendations are basically 150 minutes a week. And this is a common theme, in my opinion, for at least what we see with our patients, and that is that there's a lot of areas of cancer care, and I know that we're all trying to fix this, but there's a lot of times when patients are kind of put out there like, here's what you do, just kind of go do it. Go do it, and then if you need anything, come back. And it's just, there's so much of a hole or a void in this structure, at least with physical activity. And here's our program. I got the chance to talk about it in a lot more detail earlier, and I'm not going to do that here. We just have a 4-phase program, and our phases are phase 1. Phase 1 is for patients who are in treatment, chemotherapy or radiation. Phase 2 is basically taking a 6-month treatment program and breaking it into 2 separate sections, so a 3-month beginning and a 3-month at the end. When we first started this, we had a 6-month training program, and what we decided to do is we were missing some of the differences between those patients who were in the first month versus the 5th month. So for us to categorize patients, it really helps us track our improvements, group, the recommendations for each group. So what we have is phase 2 and phase 3 is that 6 months after treatment. And then phase 4 is that point where we hope that they're on their own. So we want to get them to the point through the first 3 phases where they can do an exercise training program on their own. We do offer phase 4 for our patients. They can come in and work as a group or with a trainer. And these are the exercise guidelines that we have. So phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, these are the exercise intensities that we recommend as well. And then also the improvements that we would expect to get. So for us, some of the things that we would recommend. We recommend that, if possible, that you participate in a supervised exercise intervention program. We do that at our facility, and I know they do that here. There are very few places that do offer that, but that's where you're going to see the most gains. We also recommend that you get a comprehensive physical assessment of your functional capacity. We see that that's one of we get a lot of value out of that. If we can know where our patients are when they walk in the door and track where they go, and to see the gains that they have, it's motivating for us and it's motivating for them as well. And then the program is developed off the assessment. There's too many exercise programs out there where they base this on something that the patient feels and not any physiological data. And I hope I get a chance to get to this here in a second. And then have goals that are reasonable. I wanted to just throw this in here because this goes in line with what I just said. I just got these data this week, and it's very interesting. Here's what we did. We did a study where we took our patients and we gave them a survey that talked about fatigue. How fatigued are you? And we give this survey all the time. And we use it to some degree to base what we do for that day with the patient. In addition to that, so that day that they fill out this survey about their fatigue, we take them over to we have a biodex machine, and you get strapped into this thing, and you can do all kinds of movements and get a lot of information about how the muscle is working, and the nervous system too, for that matter. And so we have them do leg extensions, so maximal leg extensions as hard, as fast as they can, and we look at how much force they produce, and we look at how fast they fatigue, and then we correlated that with what they reported on their forms. And what we saw, and we also did this for hand grip too, so we asked them how fatigued they were, and then we had them do a hand grip test. And what was very interesting was that we found out that these fatigue surveys that are used in research all the time did not accurately predict how well the muscle would function. So when we took, immediately after having them do that survey, we put them on the biodex machine and we strap them in and we said, give us everything you got, do this fatigue protocol, and we come up with some numbers to say this is what your fatigue index is. And we try to find a relationship between those two. What we found is there's not a relationship between those two. So an individual's perceived fatigue, of how much they're fatigued, it does not translate into the performance of the muscle itself. So if anybody asks me what are we going to do with that, I'll tell you I have no idea. I don't know what we're going to do yet. But I'll tell you what, we're going to be thinking about this a lot. And how does that? Asking the patients how they feel fatigue-wise when they come in. How is this information? This is in well over 100 patients too, by the way. So how is that going to affect how we deal with patients every day when they come in? Are we going to change the way that we're doing it? Are we going to expect more out of them even when they say that they're fatigued? So anyway, another interesting study that we've done. I'm going to say this because we just finished this and this is really cool. Okay, I've really got to talk about this one. And this is the safety of exercise. So if you remember when I was talking about our animal studies a second ago, and I said that in our animal studies, we saw that exercise decreases the amount of the chemotherapy drug that's in the tissue. That's a good thing, right? Well, we started to ask this question and said, what does that happen in the tumors? So if we have an individual who's got cancer and they're exercising, and we know in the heart it's upregulating these proteins that are protecting it, is it doing that to the tumors as well? And are we compromising the efficacy of their treatment with exercise? Nobody's done anything like this. Nobody's really answered this question. And of course, this is in an animal model, but I think the data are pretty interesting. What we saw was that our exercise training program, so this is in animals that have cancer and are treated with these chemotherapeutic drugs, we saw that the heart was protected, which is what we've seen in other studies, which was good. We saw a reduction in the amount of the drug that was accumulating in the heart. That's what we see here. And this is what we saw in the amount of drug that was in the tumors. Okay? So here is 1 day, 3 days, and 5 days after they've been treated. So these are exercise-trained animals, and then we give them the chemotherapeutic drugs, and then we look at how much is in there. I'm going to say this. The statistics say there's no significant differences, and if there's no significant differences, that's great. But on average, the amount of drug that accumulated in the tissues of the exercise animals was higher than what it was in those animals that did not exercise. And if you look at those proteins that we talked about earlier that we think might be regulating that, what we see here is that there's no difference in the tumors for that particular protein. So those tumors are not producing this protein that's going to pump the drug out. The same amount accumulates in the tumors, but a whole lot less is accumulating in the heart. That's a pretty interesting finding to see exercise training and a differential effect between the tissues. And if you look at the tumor growth, this is another thing. We see this all the time, so this isn't really, it's not that big a deal to us, but in our exercise-trained animals, if they have cancer, their tumors grow way slower and they never get nearly as big as those animals that are sedentary. So here's the sedentary animals that just got a sham drug, and you can see that in 3 days, here's the growth of the tumor. The chemotherapeutic here, doxorubicin is the chemotherapeutic drug, and you can see what happens to tumor growth. It just levels off and it stays small, which is what the chemotherapeutic drugs are supposed to do. But with exercise, this is what exercise does. So it does the same thing. Not as profound of an effect, but it levels off the growth. They just don't grow as fast. And then this is what happens when we combine treatment with exercise. So chemotherapy with exercise. So in that particular case, it was as small or smaller than those that just got the chemotherapeutic drug. So this isn't the only thing, but there's a lot of research that's coming out about, is exercise safe for patients that are undergoing treatment or after treatment? And we're seeing more and more research studies that would indicate that yes, it is. So we're not compromising the efficacy of the drug. I think I've gone a minute over my time here. Thank you. I think we have a break, and so I'll stay around if anybody wants to talk or if you have any questions or anything like that. Thank you for the opportunity, and I guess there is a break for, did you want to talk? Okay. Thank you.